Welcome to the debate. Um, Imagine spending like $50 million to buy a state-of-the-art, hyper-modern electric vehicle.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Right, but then you realize that before you even drove it off the lot, the dealer installed a cassette tape deck and a carbureted engine from 1995 right under the hood.
Well, that would be a complete disaster.
It really would be. But right now, across the global market, thousands of companies are doing exactly this. They are in the middle of or actively planning massive migrations to SAP S/4HANA.
And for those unfamiliar with the terminology, think of S/4HANA as the ultimate central nervous system of a company's operations. It is the modern, hyper-fast software that handles everything from global finance to supply chains.
Exactly. And usually, when you hear about these multi-million-dollar transitions, well, they are positioned in a very comforting way. They are pitched as a simple system upgrade or like a performance improvement.
Right, just a logical move away from ECC, which is the old legacy software systems companies have been patching together for decades.
Yeah, exactly. But when you look closely at the architectural realities we are discussing today, you realize this isn't just an IT upgrade. It is a once-in-a-decade opportunity to fundamentally redesign how an organization actually operates.
But one critical area is consistently underestimated, right? It gets treated as a total afterthought, and that is the tax and compliance architecture.
It really is the single biggest blind spot in these modern transformations, which brings us to the central disagreement of our discussion today.
The unavoidable question.
Yes, the unavoidable question. Every single S4 program must answer one foundational design question, and there is absolutely no getting around it. Where should the tax logic live?
Right.
I take the position that the only way to build a scalable, future-ready system is through a decoupled architecture. This means keeping the ERP, the central SAP system, as the pure system of record, but fundamentally externalizing the tax logic into a dedicated compliance engine.
And I take the opposing view. I argue for the ERP-centric model, meaning I believe that embedding tax logic directly inside SAP is absolutely essential if an organization wants to fully leverage the ERP's integrated financial operations.
All right, let's lay out our core positions here. The way I read the landscape right now, the biggest missed opportunity in these massive S4 programs is that organizations are investing tens of millions of dollars to modernize their central nervous system.
Huge investments, yeah.
Massive. Only to rebuild their exact same past inside the new software. Think about what a global tax department looks like right now. It is often a nightmare of, fragmented tax logic, highly specific country-level customizations, and armies of accountants.
Downloading massive CSV spreadsheets for manual month-end reconciliations, I bet?
You nailed it. And what companies are doing is taking those exact same broken processes and just lifting and shifting them into S/4HANA. This creates a highly dangerous outcome,
Because you end up with a beautifully modern ERP that is running entirely outdated operating models?
Exactly. By decoupling compliance from the ERP, we completely change the paradigm. In a decoupled model, SAP remains a single source of truth. But by using external APIs, digital bridges that let systems talk in milliseconds, we push the actual calculation out to an external compliance engine.
I see.
Yeah. So organizations finally gain flexibility, scalability, and global consistency. The S4 system stays clean, it runs fast, and tax doesn't bog down the core architecture.
I come at it from a different way. We have to look at what S/4HANA is fundamentally designed to do. It is not just a digital ledger.
Right. It's much more than that.
Exactly. It is built for real-time processing. It is built for in-memory analytics, meaning it holds massive amounts of data in active memory rather than on slow disk drives.
Which lets it calculate millions of financial records instantly.
Precisely. It is built for deeply integrated financial operations. When you externalize your tax logic, you are treating tax as a downstream reporting layer. You are treating it as something that happens after the business is done.
Well, it historically has been, right?
Historically, sure, but the operational reality of the modern world is that tax is moving directly into the core transaction flow. Tax authorities today are validating transactions in real time.
Which is a huge shift.
It is. Because of that, data must be correct at the source. Errors have to be prevented the exact millisecond the transaction occurs, not fixed later in some external system.
I follow you.
So embedding tax logic directly into SAP ensures that compliance is deeply rooted in that core transaction flow. It utilizes the real-time processing power the organization just paid millions for, rather than pushing data out across an API bridge.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. When you talk about embedding everything into the core transaction flow, you are inevitably talking about over-customizing SAP.
Well, customization is part of the implementation.
But architectural blueprints consistently identify this as one of the major pitfalls of any S/4 migration. It's the dangerous temptation to try and solve everything inside the ERP. Let's think about what that actually means operationally.
Okay, break it down for me.
Embedding country-specific tax regulations directly into the ERP code is exactly like welding a GPS system into a car's engine block. Every single time the map changes, like if Poland updates its VAT reporting structure, you have to tear apart the engine to update it.
That sounds aggressive.
It is. Every time France introduces a new digital mandate or a country changes an invoice format, you have to open the core code of your financial system. This creates immensely rigid systems and builds up technical debt.
Right, but
And just to finish the thought, when you want to run a simple software update on your ERP, you suddenly have to do 6 months of regression testing because your core financial engine is entirely entangled with local tax laws. Decoupling compliance prevents that rigidity.
that's a compelling argument. But have you considered the operational reality of real-time compliance? The market gives us a very stark warning here.
What warning is that?
In a real-time compliance world, errors surface faster, dependencies increase, and operational risks grow exponentially. If you are a CFO listening to this, you might be thinking, why do I care where the logic lives as long as the tax is paid?
Which is a totally fair question.
It is. But you care because if you decouple this architecture and the external API goes down, your entire supply chain stops. When you decouple your architecture, when you weld that GPS to the outside of the car across a digital bridge, you are actually increasing your external dependencies.
I mean, APIs are pretty stable these days.
Stable, yes, but not infallible. Let's look at the mechanism of how this works. A salesperson enters a massive cross-border transaction. In a decoupled model, your ERP literally has to pause.
Just for a fraction of a second, though.
But it still has to package that data, send it over the internet to an external tax engine, wait for the logic to process, and wait for a response before it can finalize a highly integrated financial operation.
True, there is a ping back and forth.
And even if that takes 500 milliseconds, when you scale that across hundreds of thousands of daily transactions, you have introduced a massive operational bottleneck. What happens if the external orchestration fails?
Well,
What happens to your lightning-fast in-memory analytics if the data is suddenly fragmented across an ERP and an external centralized data layer? Keeping the logic within the ERP's core transaction flow guarantees that the data is correct at the source instantaneously.
Wait, I'll grant you that an external API introduces a fraction of a second of latency. That is a real technical reality. But you have to weigh that latency against the reality of how these systems actually scale globally.
Okay, let's talk about global scale.
This brings us to our second major point of contention, which is global scalability versus localized compliance. If you assume that ERP can gracefully handle the sheer volume of global compliance changes without buckling, you ignore how leading organizations are architecting their future.
How so?
The trend we are seeing among massive global enterprises is a distinct shift away from what you're advocating. They are moving away from country-specific compliance setups built inside SAP and moving toward centralized real-time compliance platforms.
Interesting.
Here is how that works mechanically. In a decoupled model, when a transaction occurs, the data is generated in a standardized machine-readable format. The external compliance platform takes that standard data and translates it into whatever specific format the local government needs.
Right.
Because this compliance platform is externalized, new countries can be added to the company's footprint without redesigning the ERP. If a company opens a new branch in Japan, They don't need a massive multi-million-dollar SAP configuration project.
They just turn on the Japan module?
Exactly. They just turn on the Japan module in their external tax engine. The S4 system stays clean. Operations actually become faster globally, precisely because compliance is scalable.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are prioritizing a clean IT architecture over actual compliance control.
I wouldn't say that.
But you are. The danger of ignoring country-by-country solutions in favor of some massive external global design is a severe lack of control and immense data fragmentation. The ERP-centric model relies on country-specific configurations for a very simple, unavoidable reason.
Which is,
Tax authorities dictate local, not global rules. There is absolutely no such thing as a global tax law. Let's break down what this looks like in reality.
okay, let's hear the reality.
You are dealing with clearance models in places like Brazil or Italy. In a clearance model, the government literally has to intercept, review, and legally approve your invoice before you are even allowed to send it to your customer.
I am familiar with the clearance models, yes.
Right, so by embedding the tax logic inside SAP, you ensure precise, localized compliance within the system of record. The system knows exactly what data Brazil requires before the transaction is even saved.
But an external engine knows that too.
But when you try to abstract that into a centralized external layer, you risk losing the highly specific transactional data structures that local authorities demand. The ERP sends its standardized data to the external engine, and the engine realizes it's missing a specific local tax code.
Well, the standard data model should account for that.
If it doesn't, the government rejects the invoice. Your truck literally cannot leave the loading dock because your abstract global design ignored the reality that compliance is inherently localized.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are assuming that standardization means losing detail. When you say we must build country-specific configurations inside SAP to handle Brazil or Italy, you are advocating for legacy thinking.
Legacy thinking? How is real-time processing legacy?
Because it has paralyzed IT departments for 20 years. Leading enterprise architects are asking, how do we design an architecture that works globally? They are not asking how to hard-code SAP for Brazilian tax law.
But you have to comply with Brazilian tax law.
Of course you do. But the way you handle this is by building centralized data layers and standardizing transaction data outside the core. You ensure the ERP captures a rich, standardized set of data, and then you handle the extreme local nuances in the external compliance orchestration layer.
So the external engine does the heavy lifting for formatting.
Exactly. S/4HANA is about data consistency and structural integrity. If you clutter it with every single local tax variation, you lose that consistency. You end up with one way of entering data for Europe, another for South America, and another for Asia.
Right, but
The external engine's entire purpose is to be the translator. It takes your perfectly clean, standardized ERP data and translates it into the chaotic, localized languages of global tax authorities.
But S4 is not just about new interfaces and keeping things neat. It is fundamentally about data consistency and structure, exactly as you just said. And we have to ask ourselves, where does that structure originate?
In the transaction.
Right. It originates at the source, in the ERP. You cannot have clean data if the system generating it relies on an external engine to tell it what is right and wrong after the fact.
I don't think it's after the fact.
It is after the transaction is entered. If we are talking about architectural principles, one of the most vital is that errors must be prevented, not fixed later. An ERP-centric model forces the organization to get the transaction exactly right the moment a user hits enter.
Because the logic is embedded.
Exactly. If a user forgets a required tax code, the system stops them immediately. It enforces data discipline.
And that focus on data discipline actually brings us to our third major point of contention, because that source data isn't just for human auditors anymore.
What do you mean?
If we look 5 years down the road, we aren't just building systems for today's real-time tax mandates. We are building the foundation for the Internet of Agents.
Ah, AI.
Yes. For listeners, the Internet of Agents refers to the incoming era where AI systems will continuously talk to each other to validate transactions, enforce compliance, and automate business decisions autonomously.
Without human intervention, yeah.
Right. S4 systems will not operate in isolation.
They will be part of a vast ecosystem of intelligent agents. And for that AI ecosystem to function, enterprise architecture blueprints explicitly mandate external orchestration.
Okay, but how does that relate to the core ERP?
Think of it like the human body. S/4HANA is a central nervous system. It needs to focus on keeping the heart beating, managing the core ledger. The external orchestration layer acts as the reflexes.
I see where you're going with this.
If you embed the tax logic into the core, you're forcing the central nervous system to consciously process every single reflex action. It is entirely antithetical to an externalized, agent-based ecosystem.
So you're saying we need to offload it?
To future-proof the organization, yes. You must decouple the system so that these intelligent AI agents can interact with centralized compliance platforms, pulling the calculation burden off the core ERP.
I completely agree that AI and the Internet of Agents represent the future of these systems. But let's look at the absolute prerequisite for that future to exist. Clean data and standardized structures.
Which we both want.
Right, we keep coming back to this. The foundational rule of AI is garbage in, garbage out. The AI foundation collapses without perfect data.
I totally agree.
My argument is that an ERP-centric model is the only way to enforce this standardization rigorously at the transaction level. Intelligent agents cannot validate transactions effectively if the underlying core system allows bad data to be entered.
You think they'll just cross their fingers and hope the API catches it?
Exactly. If your ERP doesn't internally enforce the exact data structures required at the very moment of creation, you feed garbage to the AI. Embedding tax logic ensures that the foundation is rock solid.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Standardized data structures absolutely do not require the calculation logic to live inside the core.
How so?
In an ecosystem of intelligent agents, you want the ERP to do what it does best: record the financial transaction using a standardized, unshakable data model.
Okay.
Then, the intelligent AI agents, which live out in that external orchestration layer, handle the incredibly complex, constantly changing regulatory validation.
But why not do it inside?
Because AI is perfectly suited to monitor global tax changes and apply them dynamically. If you embed the logic, you are forcing SAP to act as both the foundational ledger and the dynamic intelligent agent. You are asking a foundational database to act like an agile AI brain.
I don't see it as too much weight. I see it as utilizing the in-memory analytics and real-time processing capabilities of S/4HANA for their intended purpose.
But $50 million is a lot to spend on a system just to clutter it.
Why invest $50 million in a massively powerful real-time processing engine if you are going to actively offload the most critical calculations to an external layer?
Well, it's about efficiency.
This migration is a financial transformation, not just an IT project. CFOs need real-time visibility into their liabilities. If compliance is embedded, visibility is instantaneous and absolute. Every ledger entry is mathematically complete the second it happens.
And if it's decoupled?
If it is decoupled, you always have a gap. You have a latency between the transaction occurring and the compliance verification returning from the API. In a world of real-time AI agents, even a slight delay in financial visibility is an unacceptable operational risk.
But the reality of those country-specific configurations you are defending is that they lead to the exact pitfall that ruins so many of these transformations.
Which is?
When the complexity of embedding tax logic directly into the ERP code becomes too high. When the IT team realizes how hard it is to hard-code Brazilian, Italian, and Polish tax law into SAP, they just give up.
They don't give up. These massive programs inevitably throw their hands up and say, we will handle tax later. They push it to phase 2. They push it off because customizing SAP for every single jurisdiction is simply too slow and too expensive.
Actually, I would argue that both architectures are deeply vulnerable to that exact pitfall.
Really, both of them?
Yes.
Whether you decouple with an external engine or embed the logic in the core, treating tax as an afterthought leads to massive rework. Saying, we'll just fix it in phase 2 leads to operational delays and tens of millions in additional costs. We completely agree on that point.
We definitely do.
Whether you build the GPS into the engine or mount it on the dashboard, tax must be addressed as a foundational design decision on day 1 of the blueprinting phase.
Exactly. The failure to address tax correctly during the foundational stages means the exact same legacy problems, the manual spreadsheets, the rigid systems, will persist. They will just happen at a higher speed.
A faster mess is still a mess.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this debate, I want to summarize my position. Addressing tax as a decoupled layer during the S/4 migration is the most sustainable path forward.
All right.
By keeping the ERP as a clean, highly efficient system of record and externalizing the compliance orchestration, organizations reduce their technical complexity, they improve their control over global operations, and they truly unlock the real-time intelligence of S/4HANA without bogging it down.
And my summary remains grounded in the undeniable realities of integrated financial operations and local compliance. S/4HANA is, at its core, a financial transformation.
Right.
Keeping tax embedded within the ERP ensures absolute data accuracy at the source, preventing errors before they happen. It provides the instantaneous, real-time visibility that CFOs demand. Real-time tax validation is simply too critical to be outsourced to external API dependencies.
It is a deeply complex architectural choice. And as we've explored today, there are profound implications for scalability, operational risk, and future readiness on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
The architectural realities make one thing abundantly clear. An S/4 migration is not just about replacing old software with new software. It is about fundamentally redefining how your entire organization operates on a global scale.
If you don't get this right at the beginning, you are simply paying a premium to carry your legacy problems into the future.
Right. So for the CIOs, the CFOs, and the enterprise architects who are currently planning or actively navigating this massive transformation, we leave you with a pivotal question.
Something to think about before you write another line of code.
Exactly. Look closely at that engine block you are building. Look at the millions of dollars you are spending and ask yourself, are you truly redesigning? Wait, let me rephrase that. Are you truly redesigning or are you just rebuilding?